So yeah, hopefully you're in the right place. Fingers crossed for the Can You Predict Your C Rating webinar. I'm super excited about this one. We've wanted to do it for a long time. So I'm really excited, and we've got such a great lineup as well. So yeah, I was just thinking we actually haven't done a webinar since January, which is like our longest gap ever. So yeah, hopefully you've missed us. We're back with a absolute three stellar people lineup. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed today. Do pop any questions in the chat. I think I'd ask, as there's 3 speakers, that if you have a question that's for a particular person, just name them so that I can easily pick out who to ask them to. Yeah, we are going to send, so everyone always asks, do you get the recording? You do get a full replay, so slides and all the audio. And we also, we're nice, so we send you a care package as well. We're good like that. And you'll get that in the next few days after the webinar. So like I said, do ask us questions, and we absolutely love this being a dialogue, and I think some of the best conversations happen in the comments. So yeah, let me know what your questions are as we go through it, any comments that you've got, any feedback. I'm going to try and go through my part as soon as possible so we can get to the good stuff. So I'll be framing the puzzle, and then we've got the 3 lenses. So I'm going to frame the puzzle, then we've got the 3 lenses that we're looking at this through. Actions you can take today if you want to sort of learn more about this and develop it a little bit further. And then we'll have, like I say, that meaty bit of Q&A at the end. So hopefully that all sounds good for the next sort of 55 minutes before your lunch break. So I'm going to get cracking. Like I say, we've got a packed agenda. I think the best way to start thinking about the question of can data predict a C1 is asking, what is a C1? What does it actually mean? And yeah, when I was doing the research for this, I was quite surprised that you sort of think of C1 as a very much an end goal, a finish line, like a reward. It's the end of the process. But actually what I found is it's very much not. It's not perfect. It's not, it's not you done. In the regulator's own language, it means reasonably competent with a system to catch and fix your own mistakes. So a few CEOs have been in the news the last few weeks just talking about their C1. So Greg Reed at Places for People, which is the largest housing association to ever be awarded a C1, calls it not a job done. Glenn Harris at Midland Heart called it a starting pistol, not a finish line. Glenn also says every day we will let someone down, and that's a C1 leader talking. So that I found that quite surprising, to be honest. So the question sort of moves from, how do we get everything in order? How do we get sort of perfection? How do we really improve our metrics, to something more like, do we have a system that captures what we get wrong? And then can we prove it? So we're 3 years in now, 3 years of judgments. Only about a quarter of landlords judged have achieved C1. Although from yesterday, that club has got quite a lot busier. So April, there was one C1 awarded to the Guinness Partnership. So yeah, well done, Chris and the team. Guinness is a very old Wordnerds friend. So we're really tough for the team there. And then yesterday there was 4 new C1s. So Stockport Council, Hammersmith and Fulham Council, Housing 21, and also Gold Lane Housing. Guinness actually co-designed some of the Wordnerds housing specific frameworks. And, obviously I've landed that brilliant rating. So I think the first thing to sort of be thinking about is, taking your feedback and a qual, quant, and then action approach. It really isn't theoretical. It's very much about what you can be doing practically. And that does help to drive that higher level. I looked at the language in some of those new judgments, and the same things keep showing up. So co-produced, co-designed, clearly evidenced. Tenant feedback has directly impacted service delivery. Hammersmith and Fulham co-produced a repairs contractors customer charter with tenants. Stockport tenants shaped a new customer experience strategy. They're not just engagement gestures, sort of empty things. They are very much tenants changing how the landlord operates. And here's why it matters now in May 2026. So in October, the STAIR's transparency standards land, and residents will stop just being customers and start being, somewhat of auditors with that legal right to scrutinise data. It's very much a person, in a home rather than, sort of doing things that the regulator is going to reward. Predictive data in this way becomes a nice to have. Starts being a nice to have, it becomes that early warning system that you really need. I found this really interesting looking through the judgments. I know this is sad, I probably need to get a life, but I've basically read through every single consumer grading judgment published since April 2024. And there are some patterns that are reoccurring that just don't make sense, that I was, sort of not expecting as I was going through it. And we've called this the Wolverhampton Paradox. So have a look at the stats there on the table that one of our marketing team has beautifully designed. Wolverhampton, you can see on the left there, 95% non-emergency repairs, 99% on stage 1 complaints on time. Great numbers. And then you can see at the bottom there, they got a C2. Now, BCP Council, on the other hand, low numbers across the board, and they managed to get a C1. So from what you'd expect on KPIs alone, Wolverhampton's a C1 all day, but the regulator is looking at the what, they're looking at the how and the feel, and it's not just operational nuance, it's cultural. So BCP got there by being honest about their problems, their shortcomings, and showing that tenant voice had actually changed something. And it's very much the same pattern at the top of the table. So Places for People openly own their 57% TSM score on communication, and that really isn't anything to write home about. I'm sure lots of people on the call have better scores than that. The CEO openly admits our communication just isn't great. Midland Heart deliberately shared data that makes the board uncomfortable. These are organisations with paid tenants on the operations committee. It's not a box ticking exercise. It's very much bringing tenant voice into every aspect of the business. There was a couple of new announcements yesterday that handed us 2 fresh examples of this. So again, Milton Keynes, absolutely amazing stats, better than Wolverhampton. And again, they got a C2. The judgment says that most opportunities for tenants to influence have only been developed in the last 12 months. And again, the same for Salford. So again, effective, efficient, timely repairs, proactive on damp and mould, hitting their performance targets, and they got a C2. And why is that? Well, scrutiny is not tenant-led. Tenant data is incomplete and not routinely updated. So there's 4 judgments there, all with the same verdict. Operational KPIs without the tenant voice equals C2 and beyond a doubt. The May batch yesterday sharpens the positive flip side too. BCP self-referred in June 2024 for overdue fire, electrical and water safety actions, and they got a C1. Stockport self-referred in December 2025 for overdue fire safety remedials, and they got a C1. So both of them got their grade because they raised the flag, not despite it. The regulator rewards posture, and servicing what's broken is itself part of being reasonably competent. One last thing worth knowing about where the floor sits. So the May batch also delivered the latest C3, which was the London Borough of Islington. And they had serious failings on stock condition data and health and safety information accuracy. So only 13% of homes had been surveyed at inspection. But the judgment explicitly said that officers and councillors demonstrated a fair and respectful culture towards tenants. So the culture was fine, the data wasn't. So the pattern isn't culture over numbers, it's very much both. You need data you can stand behind, and you need to show that your tenant voice has actually changed something. The regulator's not asking about your numbers and do they look good. They're asking, has that tenant voice done anything? Has it changed anything in your business? And these examples that I've been through there just don't reflect that. The lived experience is the hard question that lives in the qualitative text, not the quant. And that's the gap that we're here to bridge today. Now, we're looking at this through 3 lenses to break it down into a bit more detail. You need what happened, which is the hard benchmarks and the numbers. You need the voice of the tenant, which is the qualitative feedback layer. And you need why it happened, how did it feel, and did anybody hear it? And that's the case study. That's what it looks like at board level, right? It's the honest version, not the polished one. So 1 lens just isn't enough. 3 gives you the truth. And as if by magic, that's our amazing panel today. So that's me, Sarah Wilson. I'm here to be hosting, to field any questions that you've got. And then we're absolutely delighted to be joined by a webinar newbie. We've got John who's a research manager at Housemark. We're super excited to have you on the podcast and the webinar, John. He's been doing this for 20 years now, making his mark in the sector. And he's actually developed a methodology that works out where the sector's heading on cost and performance. So if anyone really knows the numbers in detail, it's you, John. And then we're delighted to bring back Steve from Wordnerds. Steve's one of our founders, and he's a true word nerd in every sense. He's used to spending all day looking at the millions of words that tenants use when they're not just ticking that survey box. He probably reads more surveys than's healthy, but he finds the cultural signs that the KPIs just can't. And then we're delighted to be joined by Ed from Curo. So Curo are a Wordnerds customer, but more importantly, a C1 organisation. And Ed's going to be pulling back the curtain on what they've practically been doing to achieve the C1. Not perfection, definitely not, marketing glossed finished product, but it's exactly the sort of posture that the top rated landlords are taking. So John, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to, just dealing with a bit of echo there. So I was just looking at some of the data and desktop analysis that I've done. So to the starting point, we've kind of like got a bit of an idea about where the C1 grading comes from and what goes into it. But I just wanted to flag up the methodology that the Regulator of Social Housing uses. So the inspection model is made up of 7 components, and it doesn't just cover the consumer angle that we're looking at the C1 gradings. It covers the governance and viability, which for housing associations and to an extent for local authorities kind of go into the background for the consumer judgment. So whether that's looking at strategy, which covers things like the delivery of medium and short-term values, looking at value for money as well, the structure, so how the corporate, the financial and governance elements of an organization interact with each other, where the oversight is, reporting and understanding. Then with the service outcomes, that's more aligned with the consumer standards. So the specific references to stock quality, tenancy management, antisocial behavior, sustainment, rent collection, those kind of things, the kind of dealing with the tenants and the properties that they live in. Risk management, when they're thinking about looking at the appetite that an organization has. So it's going so far, but not going too far in terms of taking risks, and how that is reflected in the strategy. We are going to do this and we're going to make it work. And we know it's a bit risky, but we've managed it in this particular way. With transparency, that's about the interactions on a sort of personal level between the landlord and tenants. So focusing on things like fairness and respect, meeting the diverse needs of tenants, and making sure that the service is structured towards how they want to engage with the landlord. And then looking at the more formal involvement that tenants have, so that actual scrutiny and ability to influence decision making at the landlord. Financial resilience, yeah, it's a bit more focused on the sort of G&V sides of the inspection. But in terms of consumer standards, it's looking at the costs and the efficiency. So we know that an efficient landlord works better and is likely to have better services as a result, and have more viability as a result of working better and working more efficiency. And then lastly, it looks at the governance. So that's how the strategic outcomes are developed by the board or other governing body, and then how that promotes the long-term success of the organization. So just in terms of the actual C1 to C4 gradings themselves, there's that sliding scale of delivering it, and like Sarah was saying before, it's not just enough to just get to that C1. You need to be surpassing it. You need to be going above and beyond what it says. That's the sort of minimum. So if you've got C2, you've got some weaknesses, and then you start getting into the failings of C3s and C4s. We haven't had that many C4 judgments. There's only a few that have been trickling through. I think we're still in single figures at the moment on that. So what does this actually look like in terms of the numbers? So I've done some crunching, looking at tenant satisfaction measure data, value for money metrics data, Housemark's own data, looking at costs, satisfaction, performance that sit outside the regulatory environment. And I found some patterns. So I think the regulator doesn't appreciate sort of people trying to draw a direct line between TSMs and consumer judgments. They sort of bristle if that's ever sort of put to them. But there are some tendencies. I think it's safe to say that C1s, they do tend to have higher satisfaction ratings. So out of the 3 groups, couldn't really do C4s. There's just not enough of them to get a decent sample. But out of C1 to C3, higher satisfaction, 9, 10 percentage points higher than C2s and C3s. They have more staff, which kind of stands to reason. But it shows that when you're working efficiently, you can have more people on the ground, more people there having contact with tenants. So it's really important to both have lower costs, but also make sure that people are there when the tenants need them. Something else was interesting: lower maintenance costs. So we've often found this with Housemark data, that there is a correlation, an inverse correlation between higher maintenance costs and lower satisfaction. So it's about the organisation working efficiently, and you can see that with the C1 grading and lower maintenance costs compared to the other groups. Higher energy efficiency ratings. Now, this was a bit of a googly, but I think it sort of shows that once you've got the basics in place in terms of meeting consumer standards, that you can then start to think about other responsibilities you have as a landlord, and things like improving the energy efficiency of your stock. There's quite a lot of things that need to be pulled together in order to do that, but we do look at higher average EPC ratings across C1 landlords compared to C2 and C3. Some of the characteristics in the other gradings we found. So C2s, they've kind of got the efficiency, but it's translated in lower overall costs. So you can see where some of those weaknesses are coming in terms of the value that you can add with those lower costs that the C1s seem to have in place. Something else was interesting is that C2 landlords tended to have higher new supply rates, so bigger development programs in proportion to their overall stock size. That's looking at that BFM metric. So it's almost like if you've got to make a choice between service to existing tenants and building new, C2s tend to go on the building new side of it, which then affects the service with existing tenants. Just thinking about if you've got hundreds and hundreds of new properties coming on board, what the impact is on the housing management staff, the repairs staff working on the front line, what the impact is on them with all these new tenants and new properties coming in, and think of the effect there. Also, C2s had the shortest wait times for calls. I mean, these have gone up exponentially over the last 10 years. Housemark data from the mid 2010s, we were looking at average of 30 seconds wait till you got through to a person. Now it's more like an average of 300 seconds. It's crazy, but we're still seeing C2s with that efficiency hat on. They're sort of getting those lower call wait times. And again, with that efficiency, but not necessarily looking at the value added, C2's lowest arrears out of the three groups. Then with C3s, where you've actually got some failings identified by the regulator, at the lowest staffing ratios of all the three groups. Little or no development. So obviously development is something that you can do once you've got, once you've got your sort of basics in place. And so it's very much smaller. It could be related to the number of local authorities that are included in that C3 group. So there's an element there. Local authorities tend to have much smaller development programs compared to housing associations. The highest management costs, so said again there about the efficiency. So C3s, they're not making that grade. They are likely to have higher costs as a result. It could be that they're sort of moving into better territory, or it could be that they're just not using the money efficiently. And another kind of bellwether measure we have in here is extended void times. So there's so many moving parts into getting a property relet that if they're not all working together, not all the management, maintenance teams, third parties, external agencies working together, it's quite easy that a property will just sit empty for longer and longer, and you don't have those efficient systems on the ball getting those void times down. So that kind of gives you an idea about what the stats look like. So what does this feel like? We've done a few kind of mock inspection works for landlords, and it's really interesting to see how the approaches to the different elements of an inspection, where we've gone into look and see whether a landlord is meeting all the elements of consumer standards. So there's a document review part of an inspection. So just the kind of the impression that you give if, say, you're a council that used to have an Almo and you're providing documents that still have the Almo logo on it, or it says this policy will be reviewed in July 2025, and we're like, well, hang on, it's May 2026 now. Why haven't you reviewed it? We see all these kind of things when we're going in, and I'm sure the regulator does as well. And I'm sure that they don't take too kindly to seeing things that are blatantly kind of out of date and haven't been worked on. And you can see that when it comes through in the stats as well. The communications, we do see an awful lot of lip service, well, we put that information on the website, or we've put it on a notice board in the at the bottom of the block of flats or something like that. So it's not about just sort of punting out something that's sort of gives information across at face value. It's about how you process that and how you process what's coming back to you as well from the tenants. Really important. You can see that coming up time and again in the inspection reports. Data quality, again, that comes up in virtually every inspection report. C3s much more likely to have criticism for poor data quality than C1s. It's quite simple to talk about in terms of, well, you need to have comprehensive coverage. You need to know who is in your properties. You need to know what they prefer, the kind of communication methods they prefer, but it's actually putting it in place. But we've got quite a lot of C1s to learn from on that. Something that is quite hard to put your finger on, but you can do it quite easily just by talking to people at an organization, as we've done at Housemark when we've done these mock inspections, consumer standards assessments. You kind of get an idea about whether the person working for the organization is kind of on the ball, whether they feel that they know enough information about what they're given, whether they have the right kind of support around them, whether the relationships of the data flowing upwards and downwards through the organization between operational teams and executives is in the right place. How well do these people work together? That's a kind of cultural thing, and I'm sure as part of the inspection process, the regulator picks up on this. And then something that the RSH doesn't really do, but I find is a really interesting part of doing any kind of mock inspection or assessment of consumer standards, is actually get out on estates like the Audit Commission used to do 20 years ago. They go out and they'd actually see for themselves, walk round, are the gutters leaking? Is there an overflow pipe from a boiler that's just dripping down a wall? What do the internal communal areas look like? What do they smell like? Is the grass cut? All those kind of things kind of give you an impression about whether the landlord is delivering the right level of service and meeting expectations. Okay, so yeah, got a slide on Housemark there. I haven't really got time to go through it now, but we do offer quite a lot of services, and there's a bit of information about what we do at Housemark if you're not familiar with us. And there's a bit about me as well if you want to get in contact with me. So over to the next slide, and we are looking at qualitative feedback.
That was great. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, fascinating I really liked your comparisons of the different consumer grades. Interesting about the lower overall cost for C2 and also the shorter call wait times. Did you not get the memo that, every organisation is experiencing higher than usual call volumes? It's been going on for the last, 10, 15 years now? Yeah, you've got to laugh. So yeah, really interesting. And I'm looking forward to delving into that in a bit more detail in the Q&A. Right, over to you, Steve. Show us the words.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you all for joining us today. It's really lovely to see so many people here. And thank you, John. I thought that was fascinating, and we've obviously talked a little bit now about how to quantify some of these key challenges, key elements that the consumer rating will be looking for. There then is also these gold mines of information that come from customer and from qualitative feedback. So I think one of the most kind of neat ways I've ever heard that described is there's lots of ways of telling whether your tenants, whether your customers are safe. There's lots of tests you can do. There's lots of maintenance you can cover. Do you know whether they feel safe? And for that, you require qualitative information. You require listening to and understanding your customers. And so what I'm going to talk about is how that qualitative feedback tends to influence what the kind of the consumer grading. So how that consumer understanding can then influence that consumer grading. And we're very lucky at Wordnerds to have a unique data set to explore that issue, and which is the Wordnerds Housemark benchmark. For our frequent flyers, you'll be aware of this. There's a previous webinar where we've looked at it. But the kind of the headlines for those of you that haven't heard of it before are a group of 18 housing associations made the incredibly generous decision to make available their customer feedback around, so their qualitative customer feedback, the free text answers around their TSM. And that has then allowed us to do all kinds of interesting benchmarking stuff around the TSM feedback surveys. In this, relevant to this particular conversation, we now have groups forming in terms of their consumer rating grades. So within that group, we've got 4 C1 organizations, 4 C2 and 3 C3. For the purposes of this conversation, we've split them in C1 and then C2 and C3 together. Obviously, as John and Sarah have already alluded to, there is a big difference between C2 and C3, and we're not remotely trying to suggest that everything that happens in a C1 is positive and everything that happens in a C2 isn't. But it was a way of trying to get a sense of from the customer perspective, what are the differences that we see when we look at that C1 rating. The other qualitative feedback that we thought would be interesting to look at are those regulatory judgments themselves. So if we're talking about how to go about receiving a C1, thinking about how the regulator might is their perception of this question in the judgments that they give out also felt like a resource that we really should look at. So I'm going to really briefly run through now some of the key findings there. There will, as Sarah said, be more information coming on all of these, but and we look forward to any kind of questions you have around it. So I want to talk first of all about the TSM data, the customer feedback, and what was different about the C1s. And I think there was, interestingly, 2 things that seemed to have a real impact on those C1 scores and 1 thing that didn't. So first, the things that did have a big impact, and the biggest impact of all in terms of the difference between the C1 rated organizations and those that were not rated C1, in terms of what the customer said about them, the biggest difference of all was with the sentiment around mental health. So when a customer said of their own volition, so not a quantitative question, just they saying within, I suffer from mental health challenges, their sentiment for C1 housing associations was 10 points higher. This is a big jump, the biggest jump of any of these, all these kind of different areas of the customer experience. And I think we break it down into 270 odd different elements, from time it takes for a repair, all the way through to antisocial behavior, to grounds maintenance, to safety and security, all those kind of different aspects. And the thing that was most different about the C1 rated organizations was how they dealt with customers who discussed mental health challenges. And then we saw within the sort of top 10 of those kind of key pertinent things to C1, we saw lots of other physical and mental health challenges, from financial struggles to physical health issues to elderly customers. And that kind of understanding of those special particular instances that those customers faced felt like it was a distinguishing factor between the C1s and the non-C1s in the research that we did. The second area that I wanted to mention, which I thought was interesting because it starts with a really practical thing. So in terms of digital navigation, being able to find out information that you need over digital sources, and also pass back information in that same method, we saw a significant higher C1 sentiment score. So digital navigation was an area of positivity for those housing associations. And what we saw within the data was that had a knock-on effect. So the positivity around that then meant customers felt like they were more informed, and we saw this significant overlap between customers mentioning these issues and feeling informed. And that then had a knock-on effect to customers feeling like they trusted their housing association, which obviously is a key element to these, to all of these kind of consumer challenges that we have spoken about. And I thought it was a really interesting way of looking at relatively simple, not massively infrastructure projects, but relatively simple improvements, tangible improvements that can lead to the intangibles of the customer feeling, which in turn then means that the customers feel like they can trust their housing association more. Looking at the area which didn't impact, we were really interested to note that the C2s and C3 housing associations that we analysed actually had a higher sentiment around financial issues, around rent, around charges, that sort of thing, than the C1s did. C1s customers were more likely to be negative when they mentioned rent, when they mentioned the cost of the housing. I think there were a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, it felt like where there were more significant issues, customers tended to discuss the rent, the financial stuff less. But I think we can also see there the things that are impacting the customers feeling negative, or potentially this is more of a hygiene issue. This is something that you can get to a certain point. Once you get to a certain point of acceptability, it will not push you up sort of further into those kind of higher echelons of customer sentiment or of rating. So those are kind of three areas, or two areas that we thought were particularly pertinent, where things, where C1 seemed to be excelling, one where it didn't seem to be as pertinent to those different gradings. We also, as I say, took a look at those regulatory judgments by the housing associations, by the regulator itself. And there were a couple of, again, key areas here and differences between the C1s and those who weren't awarded C1s, as Sarah said, which didn't necessarily lie across quantifiable score-based issues, but were differences that we picked out within the data. The first was around triangulation, so around getting data from a wide range of sources and pulling it together. We saw the regularity and the diversity of that as being a key factor for C1s. Using that data then to actually go and tackle root causes and demonstrating how you use that information to drill into what can we actually do in order to support customers, and taking that line that we just saw with the digital issues going all the way through to trust, the same thing happening here of how can we drill it back into what is actually causing these issues, was seen as a real strong suit for those C1 organizations. Listening across a wide range of different channels, which I know can be a really challenging area for housing associations. Often data is siloed, often you're trying to pull together a lot of different areas. But, and I thought it was really interesting here, the Places for People C1 report mentioned particularly a range of formal and informal ways So not just waiting for the regular survey, not just having to do an official complaint in order to get this kind of information, but trying to get that kind of atmospheric understanding of the wider organization. I think John talked about a bit in his presentation. And then finally, acting on the evidence and the BCP idea of a you said, we did. We often see this kind of thing of not just this is what our customers are saying, but this is what we're doing about it. And then this is how we're informing the customers that their feedback has been listened to. So those are kind of the 4 areas of difference we saw in the qualitative, in the comments within those judgments that separated the C1s from the C2s. And as Sarah said, even where scores are higher for the C2s, these are the things that seem to nudge organizations into that C1 bracket. So in terms of where to start with this, as we've just seen, the data gathering is one of the biggest challenges. Bringing together data sets, you don't need to have everything together straight away. And I think waiting to try and get to that kind of magical point is often a mistake. Starting small, starting with what you can get, showing the insight that you have, and then building from there. Really important to categorize the data. You'll notice that a lot of this stuff we're talking about digital issues, where we're talking about rent, when we're talking about different customer priorities and vulnerabilities. That understanding of how you can go about kind of categorizing that data so that you can combine it with the quantitative data becomes really pivotal. And then always thinking about your initial purpose. We've been talking today about C1 rating and how you might go about understanding where you are with regard to looking at comparing this with what a C1 data set tends to look like. But thinking about what the purpose is for what you're trying to achieve, and focusing in on the specifics around your data, I think is how you get to that point of both having the best chance of improving your rating, but also ultimately changing your customers' lives for the better. With that, I'll pass back to Sarah.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Steve. Get your questions for John and Steve in the chat. Yeah, that was brilliant. I'd love to, if we had a bit more time, we need an afternoon for this, don't we? But I'd love to unpack the physical and mental health sentiment and why that was so much higher, because that is such a marked difference. That was, yeah, really interesting. Thank you. Now we're going to hand over to Ed at Curo. So we're super excited to have Ed join the webinar. I see we've got Maddie in the chat as well, so she can back you up. I'll just pass to her. Yeah, we're absolutely delighted to hear from you on Curo's experience and what the inspection was like, and just some insights around your process and how you've achieved that C1.
Sure, absolutely. So the compulsory slide, just introducing us for those of us who don't know who we are, but we are an organisation based in the west of England. So that's Bristol and Bath for anyone who's not from the west of England. And we own and manage around 4,000 homes. Yeah, as John said, there's loads of considerations that go into that C1 rating. Thinking about preparing for this session, we were just looking at, from a data perspective, kind of what conclusions we've drawn from that rating. And first, kind of, while we're really proud of some aspects of our performance, there's some real stuff in there. It's also, there are weaknesses within it. It's a mixed picture. A lot of it's around the middle, and there are some areas where we're actually kind of bottom quartile. So it clearly isn't, as we've kind of said already, that we're just spectacularly good at everything and well done. So it's got to be something else. So I think a couple of things that I'd really pull out. Firstly, around data quality, we were able to talk to about all of the work that we've done over many years to improve and to respect data quality, and that's throughout the organisation, right up to the board, that regularly receive reports on this, so that they can be assured that what they're has got some substance behind it. But also, we were very open about our imperfections. and we could describe, we knew what they were, we could see within the data where it was, but also we had plans in place to use data in a curiosity it was definitely a watchword with this, about being curious about our data and what we can take from it. There's definitely that kind of, I suppose, honesty dimension to this. And then lastly, I think the fact that we were able to, as well as, oh, we've got all these ideas, at some point we'll get around to it, we were actually starting to do some stuff in this space. And at the point of the inspection, this was most tangibly in relation to complaints. Complaints have been a big problem for us, as described on the slide. We'd adopted, or were starting to adopt, a new model for managing them. But it's that whole thing about learning. How do we learn from them? And so we engaged with Wordnerds specifically around that in the first instance. It's broadened out very much since then, but it's specifically focused on complaints to begin with. And this slide is really trying to just sum up, I suppose, what that looks like for us. So we'd spent a year or so prior to approaching Wordnerds developing a data warehouse, which was bringing together all of that quantitative data. So those kinds of things in that left-hand circle, stuff about our customers, our properties from multiple systems, understanding our transactions at a much more granular level, in relation to complaints, doing transformations within the data warehouse around kind of categorizing them more so that they weren't all different. There was some categorization there. But probably like lots of people on this call, so much of our valuable data is in note form, it's words, it's really, really hard to interpret. From a complaint perspective, it's those kinds of questions. We have all of that in there, but it's just prior to working with Wordnerds, really, really difficult. Any analysis that we did was pretty manual. It was very hard to see the wood for the trees. And so the work that we've done to develop those themes, to categorize those things and apply quantities to the categorizations has been really game changing. And then the last kind of circle on here is a crucial data set that we identified was missing, or at the very from everything else, which is all of the so what. So making sure that we treat learning as a data set in itself, that we've actually, we've got that in terms of the evidence, the recommendations, the actions, and that we're following that through, so that we can hold people to account. And that was where it all started. But since then, we had for many years been doing transactional surveys at large volumes across the organization. Obviously, we've been doing perception surveys as well through the TSMs. We've wrapped all of that into this as well, and we talk at the inspection about they were our plans and intentions to do it. Lastly, our vision as an organization is that by 2034, everyone will feel proud of the quality of our homes. So it's all about feeling, and unpacking that and really kind of grappling with that is something that we're actively working on at the moment. So yeah, that's my I suppose that's my reflections, the practicalities of all of this.
Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you so much. And thanks for the kind words, Ed, the text in the post. Yeah, great work there. Ed, I hope you don't mind, but yeah, this is so fascinating. I've just got a few sort of things that I'm interested in with your work with Wordnerds, if you don't mind. I think you do some things that are quite different to other organisations, specifically around the complaints piece. And I think that it would be interesting to sort of look at them in a little bit more detail. So would you mind, first of all, just talking a little bit about your sort of complaints learning report and what you do to close that inner and outer loop that we've talked about before? I know that complaints are obviously a key area for you, and most people say that they'll already learn from complaints, but sort of how have you developed that in a bit more detail with your work with Dan?
Yeah, so I think this is a combination of both things that we're doing to categorize our complaints using the quantitative data, but also wrapping into it all of that qualitative use of the themes. Yes, as you said, which allows us to get much more down into the detail. Was our complaints, at best we might be able to say it relates to repairs, but it was never. It's about we have a lot more complaints about plumbing jobs versus electrical jobs, and the complaints about plumbing jobs tend to be about point electrical jobs tend to be about equal work. All of those kinds of things. It's allowed us to get much more into detail across all of the different kind of the and the how of the complaints. I think I've lost connection.
Still there, just a bit.
Am I still there? Sorry, I've got a thing come up. Oh, cool. So yeah, so that's what we've done in terms of the learning report. Is identify those that granularity and also concentrations of complaints too, that it's not, obviously most complaints are always going to be about repairs because that's what we do most of, but actually can we understand that in relation to those overall volumes as well.
And just taking that a step further then, I know that something that you've worked on with the guys is the action tracker, because I think it's really easy, isn't it, to, like everyone says, oh yes, we listen to complaints, we do something about it, but I think it's really interesting the work that you've been doing. I know that your customer success manager highlighted that as something that most people don't do. It's your action tracker, how you actually go about doing something with the actions. Would you mind just talking about that in a bit more detail? If your Wi-Fi connection allows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and that applies. I hope so. It's not great, is it? So I think that applies across all of our customer feedback, whether it's complaints, surveys, resident engagement. What we've done is pull all of this, and it's quite simple actually in a lot of respects. We pulled all of this together into a single data set, actually a SharePoint list. It's nothing fancy, but it plugs into our data warehouse, and it allows us to absolutely, so through doing the analysis, going out to directors and saying, here's things that we're finding, what do you think about it, what could you do to address these issues, let's agree some actions that you're going to take away and implement, let's record those on the tracker and timescales and check that you're doing it. And actually that's all part of our customer feedback reports, and increasingly kind of integrating it into corporate reporting as well, so that we can absolutely close that loop on you said, we did. And also what I'd really like to kind of start doing at some point soon is, and then checking the impact of what we did afterwards. So it's an endless loop of checking that this customer feedback is having an impact.
Your work's never done, is it? Just keep going and going and going. It's like the Forth Bridge.
Not when you're curious.
No, curious at Curo. So just going back to your slide, actually, yeah, dad joke alert. I absolutely love what you've written about your vision. So, you have that really clear, strong vision that you want everyone to feel proud about the quality of your homes. And I know that Maddie's done a side piece on pride as a sort of theme and emotional layer and the lag. So trying to look at when people feel proud about their homes, when does that sort of show up in the numbers? Yeah, would you mind just referencing that just to end off your section?
Yeah, absolutely. I will do my best, but I'm sure Maddie can explain this much better than I can. So, but essentially, we capture through our TSM surveys. We've got a supplementary question which we ask about how proud customers feel of their homes. So we capture a quantitative score through that mechanism. We don't actually ask a specific question as part of that survey of, well, why do you feel proud? For a number of reasons. But what we do instead is look at the answers that those customers are giving to the other questions and the supplementary questions that we do have within the TSM survey to understand. So for this kind of group of, say, customers that we know, talking about their experiences in other regards, particularly in relation to how well maintained they feel about how well maintained their home is. And Maddie's put together a whole series of themes that are linguistic indicators about emotional warmth and sense of belonging, sense of ownership, connection, all of those kinds of things, which are very kind of in some ways intangible, but it's trying to get some tangibility around feeling, and it's really interesting what's coming out of that, and we're going to carry on working on it. It's
Well, luckily you got to the end of your section before your connection gave up, Ed. So thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Get your questions for Ed in the chat. And yeah, we'll make him answer them. I mean, if he's got to sort of handwrite them, we'll get them from him. So that was amazing. Thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed that. I hope you have. I can see some questions coming through, so you still got a couple of minutes there to get some questions out. I'm going to do a very, very quick wrap up, and then we're going to go to questions at the end, and hopefully we've still got some time to run through some of the questions that we've had. So what you'll receive from today, we're going to send a little care package with the recording, with some resources. We always commit to answering every question, so you can get a question section as well with the answers in, which is, I think a really nice sort of bonus of the webinar. I hope that you've taken away sort of a few things today. I think the first one is it's all about mindset. That's the biggest thing that I've found from our amazing speakers. It's about curiosity, Ed said it himself. It's about radical honesty. So it's about picking up the parts that you're uncomfortable with and sort of shining a light on them, which I know that it doesn't come easy to any of us. And I think all three of you have spoken about that to some degree. It's about connecting that what to the why and then doing something with them, as you've said. We're going to try, and we've also got a little guide that we're going to be sending across to help you get on your way with this. It's all about how to improve your rating, your chances, your prospects overall, which is the deep dive into the regulators language that we talked about, and also STAIR's analysis. And it's going to show you how to map that onto your own performance. So built on the same judgment analysis that we've been showing this session, including the brand new batch that was published yesterday. We've also got a bit of a deeper offer for you. If you're looking at this and thinking, I'd love to see where I'm at, I want to be part of this benchmark. We are running this custom report here. We did this in January, and that's why we've got 4 months between the webinars, because it was super popular. I think people love the idea of being able to access insights that they've never had access to before. It's the UK's first qualitative data benchmark where the data is all together for the first time. And we've got some people on the call that have gone through that process, and hopefully they're happy with it. Fingers crossed there. So yeah, we're going to be offering this again. So the same benchmark data, a custom report. We're offering the same discounted price as last time, so just under the £5,000 mark there. And what you get for that is a dashboard in Power BI generally that features this data from Housemark and Wordnerds, a fully managed report, and also a workshop, a stakeholder workshop. So if you are interested, just click the button there. It's just a call with me. That's all it is. So it's very non-salesy, as you can probably tell. So let's go to questions. I'm really looking forward to this part. Let's see what our first question was. So this one's probably for John. So from your experience, how independent is the C grade from the G grade? Could an organisation sustain a strong G if consumer outcomes are weaker? John?
There's definitely a flow. You look at the 7 pillars of the inspection regime that the regulator has, and there is definitely read across between governance and the consumer grade. I was at a conference last year, and the outgoing chief exec, Fiona McGregor, said that there's no reason why a landlord should not achieve a G1. So obviously, really, there's a really strong emphasis on getting that governance in place. And then the assumption is, I think, that better things will follow in terms of meeting the consumer standards.
Great, really helpful, thank you. This wasn't a question, but I just wanted to pop it up anyways. I thought it was really interesting. So there was a bit of a discussion going on in the chat while we were talking, all around the actual inspections, and I think it's really interesting. So one of the observations was that directors were on top of the detail, so they wouldn't have asked, like, you know, one of the research experts in the organisation. They would have expected directors to be able to talk fluently about the TSM scores and the direction, which I think is, yeah, not what you'd expect. And there's also a lot of information to be submitted. Ed, how does that match to what Curo experienced? Does that sort of ring a bell with you? I know Maddie said that was quite similar to her experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it was our exec and our senior directors on the kind of relevant senior directors that were involved in the actual discussion with the inspectors. So there was a lot of, and as was mentioned on the in the chat, yeah, a lot of documentation provided in advance, a lot of which the whole business was involved in supporting, but actually, yeah, having those conversations and so that, yeah, prepping them and helping the right answers at their fingertips was definitely a thing.
It's really interesting, isn't it? You're sort of preparing your internal team members. You wouldn't really expect that. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you. Now we've got another question from Victoria. So did you notice any organisation structure patterns in C1 orgs that seem to support that stronger data triangulation, insight, etc.? I think that's one for you, Steve.
Yes, it's a great question, and without wanting to give, you know, one of the key things about the benchmark is that the organizations involved are anonymous. We try and make that a stipulation, and we're always looking for new housing associations to join that incredible group. So that'd be great. But yeah, I mean, I think the distinctions that I've seen would be generally around, I mean, quite similar to the discussion and the comment that Chris just made. It's about that the kind of both the data in and the data out, the inputs and outputs, both being understood and championed at quite a high level in the organization. Data triangulation often involves people relinquishing data sets that they have previously controlled, and that is often a lot easier when you have that understanding of the importance of this from the top. We often see when, you know, new CEOs come in and that kind of thing, that can often be a catalyst for that kind of change. But I think, yeah, I think having that at the top, having that interest at the top, having a clear path from those insights to the senior leadership team, and, you know, the best housing associations that I've worked with tend to have a clear line from the data to the organization. And I think Chris has articulated so well why that's so important, and also it seems why the regulator seems to think it's so important as well. So that relatively that understanding at the top level tends to be the kind of the key thing that is really valuable when you're looking for that kind of C1 score.
Great, thank you so much, Steve. So we're going to pop one more question up, and then we'll wrap up. So just one for you, John. So what practical steps can landlords take to start the journey to C1? I think that'll be a nice question to end on.
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective, looking at the kind of things we've done when we've gone into landlords, it's about mapping just at the very, very practical level, thinking about that document review. What documents do you have? Where do they map across to specific elements of the consumer standards, you know, and have you got the information in the right place? And do you know where it is? Can you access it? Are you going to be supplying 3,000 documents to the regulator, which they're not going to appreciate, by the way? They're the kind of practical steps you could do at that first stage. And then it's a case of thinking, well, what's your data coverage, the harder to do stuff. But that initial stage, just think about the document review, I would.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that mapping of the documents, and yeah, doing the audit as a first step. Well, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. I don't know about you guys in the chat, but that flew by for me, went so fast. So thank you so much for that. Really enjoyed that format. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. These are all designed to sort of aid the knowledge of the sector and share best practice. So yeah, if you enjoyed it, then email me. If you didn't enjoy it, email Steve. And we'll be back very soon with our next webinar. But really hope you enjoyed that today. Keep your eye out for some sort of gifts heading into your inbox. I just want to say a huge thank you as well. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Ed. Obviously, without you, this would have been a massive monologue from me. So really appreciate your different perspectives and all the time that you spent on this to share this knowledge for everybody. So yeah, thank you so much, guys.